What a resume. Congrats. That's it for us tonight. Shannon Bream takes things from here. Miss Shannon.
Those Supreme Court clerks like yourself, Laura, pretty impressive folks.
Take care.
Thanks. All right, here's what we have coming up tonight.
President Trump says he's looking forward to speaking with Robert Mueller's team under oath. Ed Henry's tracking the latest developments as concerns grow about a so-called secret society of top FBI and DOJ officials some believe were committed to bringing down the president. Plus, illegal immigrants tell Chuck Schumer.
Chuck won't let us dream. We won't let him sleep.
Colorado Republican Senator Cory Gardner, a key player in the immigration negotiations, joins us live with the latest on the debate over DACA and how close Congress really could be to reaching a deal. We'll also have more from my visit to Israel, including a look at a controversial security fence there and what lessons the U.S. could take from it. And did former Secretary of State John Kerry urge Palestine? Trump. Former UN Ambassador John Bolton is here to help us dig deeper.
Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington. New tonight, Fox News has obtained a letter from the Justice Department to House Intelligence Chairman Devin Nunes, warning him about declassifying the much talked about 4-page classified memo penned by his staff, which allegedly outlines government surveillance abuses. You know the hashtag release the memo. The DOJ telling Nunes that releasing the info would be unprecedented and reckless. Whether or not the release would damage the Mueller investigation remains to be seen. But in surprise remarks from President Trump just before leaving for Davos, he says he'd love to talk to special counsel Robert Mueller, quote, soon.
There's been no collusion whatsoever. There's no obstruction whatsoever. And I'm looking forward to it. I would do it under oath.
You would? Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry joins us now with a look at the focus of the Mueller investigation. It's moved from collusion to obstruction. And now, today, the president says he'd be happy to talk, but he did, Ed, have a little bit of a caveat there that he'd want to run it by the lawyers.
Yeah, absolutely. And people are leaving that out in some of their reporting. But breaking tonight, I just spoke to one of those lawyers, White House counsel Ty Cobb, who's massaging a bit what President Trump said, but not walking it back. Cobb tells me the president was speaking hurriedly before leaving for Davos, but stressed the administration stands behind the message they have consistently given about continuing their complete cooperation with Robert Mueller, which includes, yes, the president eventually speaking with the special counsel directly. The details of that, though, are still being worked out by the president's personal attorneys outside the White House, John Dowd and Jay Sekulow. So you can see these statements, though, were a huge surprise from the president, not just to reporters, but maybe even to White House staff, where he told reporters he's looking forward to doing an interview with Mueller, willing to do it under oath, and even putting a timetable, the president did, of 2 to 3 weeks from now for what would be an historic session that is very risky from a legal standpoint for him to sit down directly with the special counsel. But big picture, it fits with the strategy pushed by Ty Cobb that Mueller is close to wrapping up his investigation and they have nothing to fear from cooperating, contrary to many of the leaks we've seen recently in the media, suggesting Mueller's probe will drag on for months or even years, and that his investigation is intensifying because he's been conducting all of these high-level interviews with Attorney General Jeff Sessions and others. Instead, when you read the tea leaves, this could mean that the probe is actually winding down, just as scrutiny of some of the president's critics appears to be heating up, including FBI officials Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. Republicans today demanding answers about how 5 months of their text messages were not uploaded to the FBI's archive system. New tonight, a federal law enforcement official tells Fox cell phones belonging to a few thousand FBI employees were affected by that technical glitch. At least that's what they're calling it. And officials stress they're taking steps now to recover those text messages. As Senator Chuck Grassley accused the FBI of playing hide the ball on key info about Fusion GPS and the dossier, while Republican Senator Ron Johnson claimed he's spoken to an informant who says there was a quote-unquote secret society of FBI officials trying to undermine President Trump.
It sure looks like a bureaucratic game of hide the ball rather than a genuine concern about national security.
I have heard, from somebody who has talked to our committee that there is a group of individuals within the FBI that were holding secret off-site meetings.
That was an exclusive of their own Brett Baer yesterday. Adam Schiff, meanwhile, the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, charged Republicans are only preparing to release that 4-page memo you mentioned about Obama administration surveillance of Trump officials because it will help the president politically. Meanwhile, Fox has obtained a letter just sent out today by a top justice official to House Intel Chairman Devin Nunes. As you mentioned, Shannon, it urges him to let department officials see the memo first before releasing it to the press, and warning it could be dangerous to release this publicly. I'm told, though, this is not going to deter top Republicans, Nunes and others, from their current plans to continue meticulously going through the process to eventually release what they're calling an explosive memo, Shannon.
All right, Ed Henry live with the very latest. Thank you very much, Ed.
Good to see you.
Well, the Department of Justice reopening a battle on another front today, warning sanctuary cities and states that they may be forced to prove cooperation with federal immigration authorities or else. Doug McElway joins us live with details on the drama that played out today, and it's certain to continue. Hey, Doug.
Sure is, Shannon. Pressure over the federal-local standoff regarding sanctuary cities has been building in recent months, as you know. Well, today it exploded just hours before the president was to meet with the members of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. The Department of Justice sent letters to 23 sanctuary jurisdictions, including the top 3 cities, New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago, that is threatening a withdrawal of federal safety grants if those cities refuse to turn over info about the immigration status of people in custody. Mayors that fail to do so could be threatened with arrest.
Every crime committed by someone who shouldn't be in this country is a crime that's 100% preventable. And so we are highly prioritizing these sanctuary jurisdictions, urging them to cooperate with federal law enforcement so that we can lower the crime rates in some of these places.
That announcement was not really a surprise. Attorney General Sessions had telegraphed it for weeks, including on this very newscast.
And we are receiving large numbers of the criminal element in this illegal flow. We can make America safer, and it's just common sense to me.
But a handful of mayors boycotted today's White House meeting, claiming the policy will force illegals back into the shadows, where they will no longer cooperate with police, and that crime fighting will be hurt by withholding grant money. New York's Mayor de Blasio went further, tweeting, "It's a racist assault on our immigrant communities."
So the #1 terror target in America. And this money, in part, supports our anti-terrorism efforts. So it's appalling to me that they would think about defunding the finest police force in the United States of America.
Most mayors did show up at the White House today, where they heard an earful from President Trump.
The mayors who choose to boycott this event have put the needs of criminal illegal immigrants over law-abiding Americans.
But sanctuary cities believe it's the federal government that is violating their rights. Lawsuits are now in the works in Chicago, Philadelphia, and California, which accuse the federal government of unlawfully abusing its authority with this threat of withholding grant money. Just beginning to heat up here, Shannon.
Yeah. All right, Doug McElway, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
For more, let's bring in Ed Pasquale, a constitutional law attorney who oversaw the infamous 2000 Florida recount between Al Gore and George W. Bush. Great to have you with us, Ed.
Great having you. Great seeing you, Shannon. How are you?
I'm very good. Now, listen, the president's attorneys tonight kind of playing a little bit of cleanup or clarification on some of the things he had to say today. We want to talk to you about these 2 top stories and start with what Ed told us. We heard the president on the way out of town today saying, I'm more than happy to speak with the, with the special counsel. I want to do that as soon as possible. I'll do it under oath. And then he said, but I will check with the lawyers there. What advice would you give him? If you were part of his team, would you push then for something more along the lines of written interrogatories where you can control, you see what the questions are, you can control the responses? What would you tell him to do?
Well, look, I certainly would not advise him to meet with Mueller and his team directly, and certainly not under oath. I would try to push for written interrogatories like Ronald Reagan's team did in Iran-Contra. There were written interrogatories that had an opportunity, the president and his team had an opportunity to respond in writing. It's far safer. Remember, Shannon, there's no evidence yet of Russian collusion. There's no evidence of anything wrong with the Comey firing. The only two of the people who have gotten indicted so far have been indicted for lying to the FBI. We certainly don't want to walk the president into that trap.
Yeah, because, he said today he's confident, as he has always maintained, there's never been any Russian collusion. He doesn't care what Russia was doing during the campaign. He had no conversations or interactions with them about impacting the election in any way. He sounds very confident on that measure. But as you mentioned, this Mueller investigation has branched into a lot of different areas, like special counsel obviously often does. So now that we know they're talking obstruction of justice, looking into these other firings, Are you worried that the president, although believing that he's acted completely morally, legally, and ethically may be walked into a question that could cause him trouble.
So the purpose here has to be well defined of the investigation, as well as the scope of the investigation. And the two major issues that we're hearing is Russian collusion, Russian collusion. Well, I got news for everybody. Collusion is not a crime under federal law. We're not talking about an antitrust case. We're talking about criminal collusion. No such thing, Shannon. And then the second part of it is the firing of Jim Comey. Again, there was no violation of law. The FBI director serves at the pleasure of the president, and therefore the president can fire the FBI director with or without cause. No crime. Where's the beef, Shannon?
Okay,
where's the beef?
So let's talk then about the second story, about the DOJ now saying to these sanctuary cities and states, listen, we need you to turn over information about whether or not you're breaking the law or not helping federal authorities where you're supposed to. We could withhold funds. We may subpoena you. Here's a part of what the Attorney General said today. Protecting criminal aliens from federal immigration authorities defies common sense and undermines the rule of law. We've seen too many examples of the threat to public safety represented by jurisdictions that actively thwart the federal government's immigration enforcement. Enough is enough. Now, today, a bunch of the mayors were set to meet from across the country with the president, and Mitch Landrieu from New Orleans had this to say. Unfortunately, the Trump administration's decision to threaten mayors and demonize immigrants yet again and use cities as political props in the process has made this meeting untenable. Is the DOJ on solid ground here?
Yes, I believe they are. The federal constitution under the Supremacy Clause says federal law is the supreme law of the land and preempts state and local laws, particularly, the Supreme Court has said, particularly when it comes to immigration. If we truly are a nation that is governed by laws, then we have to live to that principle. The rule of law is necessary for a civilized society, and if you believe that, you cannot pick and choose which law should apply. That's a very dangerous precedent and very unprincipled.
And quickly, there have been a couple of legal decisions from the courts that have been pushing back against some of the sanctuary city and state efforts that this administration has taken. Do they win or lose this if it goes to court?
I think as it gets up to the Supreme Court, ultimately the Supreme Court decides and errs in this on the side of the federal government under the Supremacy Act like we talked about before. I don't think there's any grounds ultimately to prevent. Look, think about it this way. What kind of chaos would you have if California had one policy around immigration and Arizona had a different one? We're no longer a country anymore with borders and an idea of who should come in and who shouldn't and under what policies if you allow that to happen. It's chaos.
We're going to talk a little bit more about the left responding to that sanctuary city letter from the DOJ today. Coming up. In the meantime, Ed Pasquale, thank you very much. Good to see you.
Thank you.
All right, it's not exceptionally rare for vice presidents to cast tie-breaking votes in the Senate, but it's really unusual for it to happen twice in the same day. Vice President Mike Pence casting two tie-breaking votes, one to overcome a procedural hurdle and the other to confirm former Kansas Governor Sam Brownback as ambassador for religious freedom. Pence, by the way, has cast more tie-breaking votes than any other vice president during a first year in office. Well, new Fox polls out tonight on how you think the president is doing. For the first time, the president's job approval on the economy is above 50%. Overall, 45% approve of the job the president is doing. That's just shy of his record high approval, 48%, which he hit in February of last year right after the inauguration. The president's seeing a sharp uptick in approval from our October survey, which had him at a record low 38% approval. Well, two more companies giving workers a boost because of tax cuts. Starbucks spending about $250 million to ramp up pay and benefits. The move comes on the heels of Verizon telling its workers, everybody but top management, will be getting 50 shares of restricted stock. House Speaker Paul Ryan trolling the minority leader today, saying, hey, Nancy Pelosi, can you hear us now? Hashtag tax reform. Well, Turkey's president renewing threats to widen the offensive against U.S.-backed Syrian Kurdish fighters. An expanded operation in its fifth straight day in northern Syria could bring Turkish troops and their Syrian allies even closer to U.S. forces supporting the Kurds. President Trump warning Turkish President Erdogan in a phone call tonight to, quote, exercise caution and to avoid any actions that might risk conflict between Turkish and American forces. Well, a controversial new law set to be rolled out in California this spring. Does it allow illegal immigrants to vote? Trace Gallagher has been investigating the claims and counterclaims, he'll tell us. And we're tracking day 3 of the far left's backlash against the Democratic leadership. The Dreamers are getting loud, saying if they don't get a legislative fix, Minority Leader Chuck Schumer is not going to get his sleep. And stick around for Colorado Senator Cory Gardner checking in on the latest on the DACA negotiations as he takes heat now from the right. Progressives are still angry. The deal to end the government shutdown did not include a resolution for DACA recipients. They've dubbed it the Schumer sellout. And last night, protesters took to Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer's house with a message.
If Chuck won't let us dream, we won't let him sleep.
I'm here to stand up again for our community, and also because my life is on the line.
Joining me now, Senator Cory Gardner, Senate Committee on the Budget and Senate Foreign Relations Committee member, and he is a man in the middle of all of these negotiations on immigration. Great to have you with us tonight.
Thanks for having me tonight.
Okay, I got to ask you, first of all, when you were campaigning and running, there were so many people running ads against you that you're going to be some crazy far right-wing nut job. And now we have you pushing it back against the Attorney General on marijuana. And a lot of people think this position you have immigration is not so conservative either. How do you respond?
Well, look, I think when it comes to the issue of marijuana, something I opposed when I was in Colorado, opposed it in the state legislature, the legalization, but it's a matter of states' rights. It's a matter of federalism. Colorado voters approved it. I'm going to stand up for the people of Colorado. And when it comes to immigration issues, I think people in this country, no matter what political affiliation they are, want to fix a broken immigration system. They want border security. They want to know that we're not going to end up in the same spot 5 or 10 years from now that we're in today. And I don't think that that's a conservative or liberal cause. I think it's just a matter of enforcing our law and making things right in a broken system.
So let's talk a little bit about this Gang of Six proposal that you were part of. It seems like in the House and Senate, the one thing you agree on is you want a fix of some kind of legal status for DACA recipients. But then modifications to chain migration instead of getting rid of it altogether, modifications to visa lottery instead of getting rid of it altogether, and a whole lot less money for the wall or for border security than the president was asking for. So some of your colleagues, GOP colleagues in the Senate, had to say this. Senator Cornyn says the Gang of Six deal to fix DACA will not get a vote in the House or the Senate because POTUS won't sign it. Let's go back to the drawing board and get this done. Border security and diversity visa lottery, limit chain migration, and fix DACA. Senator Cotton says this, might as well roll it straight into the trash can. Mass amnesty far beyond DACA, fake border security, no end to chain migration. It sounds like there's a little work to do to get everybody on the same page over there in the Senate.
Well, it's always risky when you go first, when you put something together, try to get a solution in place before you have all the answers of where people are. And that's what we tried to do, really to push a conversation, doing our best to meet what the president had laid out, the 4 things that he said he wanted. We put together a plan that addressed the border wall. We need to do more. It's clear, but we used numbers that he had put forward when we really didn't have any other numbers, so we can always do better. We tried to end chain migration the way we could. We can do it differently. There's a way to do this thing. And so there's a lot of conversations on the Hill about gangs. I mean, Gang of 6, Gang of 14, Gang of 8, Gang of prime numbers. I don't exactly know what is so important about 6 or 8. What's important is 279, the number 279. That's 60 members of the Senate, 218 members of the House, and the president. That's what's going to be required to fix DACA and to have an immigration solution that should include border security.
Okay, what you have on the House side, headed up primarily by House Judiciary Chair Bob Goodlatte's so different than what you're offering up in the Senate. Both sides are saying they can't pass in the other house. What you have in the Senate, what you have in the House, they could pass in those places. They can't pass each other, and they can't get to the president for a signature, the Senate piece. So I know you're having a lot of discussions within the Senate and the House side. I know they're doing it, but are there bicameral discussions? I mean, how do you guys inch to each other?
Yeah, there are. I mean, if you look at what President Trump had set out a couple of weeks ago when he talked about working with Steny Hoyer and Kevin McCarthy and John Cornyn and Dick Durbin, those conversations continue. I know last week they continued, and I know John and Dick were together today for a conversation with over 24 members of the Senate. Look, it's no good for us to pass a bill out of the Senate. If we pass a bill out of the Senate that doesn't go anywhere, what good have we done? It has to be able to pass the Senate, Republican support in the House, to pass the House, and to be signed by the president. That's got to be the ultimate goal. Look, if the objective is politics, this isn't ever going to be solved. We will be in the same spot 6 months from now in a year. If the objective is good policy, then we can get this done.
Does it bother you when people call your plan amnesty? Are you afraid of that word or no? Because you're okay with
what I want people to do is to not be afraid to put ideas forward. We put an idea forward. It was rejected. That's fine. Let's make it better. Let's build on it. Let's try something new. But if we're going to beat people into the corners and never try something, we're going to continue to have a broken system. And what we have right now, I think most people across the country would realize it's not working. So let's fix it. And so we put together a plan. People said, hey, we can do better. Let's do better. Let's find that solution. Republicans, Democrats can do it. And without the president's signature, what good have we done?
Yes or no? Do you get a plan together by February 8th? Are we doing another CR?
I believe we can. I believe we will. It sounds like there has to be another CR just as they prepare to write the omnibus. I think that's what Senator Cornyn was talking about today as well. But I think we can come together, get this done in a way that America can be proud and fix it so that we're not here in 10, 20, and 30 years from now.
All right. Keep us updated.
Thanks. We'll do.
It's great to have you with us tonight.
Good to be here.
Thanks for coming in. All right. Israel has a long and complicated security barrier officials say is saving lives. More from my trip to Israel with a look at what America can learn from Israel's controversial separation wall. We talked to the guy who put it together. And how a tragedy in a small Kentucky town is highlighting a disturbing trend. But right after the break, our own Trace Gallagher investigates a new California law some claim gives illegal immigrants the right to vote. We'll separate fact from fiction. On April 1st, a new motor voter law will take effect in California, automatically registering eligible citizens to vote when they visit their DMV for their licenses. With the Golden State also having a law on its books which allows illegal immigrants to get driver's licenses, does the state have the necessary safeguards in place to prevent illegal aliens from being registered to vote? There have been a lot of claims about this. Trace Gallagher has been digging into the story and reports for us tonight. Hi, Trace.
Hey, Shannon, there are 5 to 6 million eligible voters in California who are not registered to vote. The new policy is meant to make it easier for them to register. So beginning in April, the only way California drivers who say that they are legal citizens won't have their information sent to the state voter rolls is if they opt out. Otherwise, it's automatic. But critics say that opens the door to potential voter fraud, and here's why. Since 2015, California has given driver's licenses to an estimated 1 million illegal immigrants. When those illegals apply for renewals by mail or in person, the fear is they could say they're legal and have their information forwarded to the voter registration office. The California Secretary of State says that won't happen for 2 reasons. 1, potential voters have to show proof of age with either a passport or birth certificate, which also shows their citizenship status. And 2, illegal immigrants are given special driver's licenses that say federal limits apply, meaning they cannot fly or vote. The Election Integrity Project California says these types of assurances are all well and good, but they'd rather adhere to the old motto of trust but verify. And they're calling on the state to allow citizen or journalist oversight. In other words, an unbiased group to check out the DMV process. Watch.
If people are really feeling comfortable about the situation in the state, then they should have no problem opening the doors and allowing us to verify that. They may be overblown for all we know, but based on what we have observed in terms of the state's reliability in effectively following other laws, we have reason to doubt on this one.
And as a retired special agent for Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, told Fox News, people are routinely caught crossing the border with fake voter registration cards. So if there's a way to illegally register to vote, someone is bound to exploit it. Shannon.
All right. Thank you for digging into that for us and separating a little fact from fiction there. Trace, great to see you.
Sure.
All right, the small southwest Kentucky town of Benton is still in shock and in mourning tonight. 2 students were killed at the local high school by a classmate with a gun. It is the latest in a series of school shootings already this year. Senior correspondent Mike Tobin has the reports.
Shannon, the initial reaction to the shooting is that people couldn't believe it happened here in small town America. The reality is that people knew it could. The students here had already practiced mass shooter drills, and on Tuesday morning, those drills were put to the test.
Evil makes no sense.
Again, traumatized people in a small town sing and pray, attempting to come to grips with the senseless tragedy of a school shooting. The first deadly school shooting of the year erupted in Benton, a small town in Kentucky. Police say a student opened fire as his classmates gathered before the first bell.
It sounded like there was a fight. Someone was hitting on the window. I took out my headphones and turned around, and everyone was just broken up. They were running. I saw the flashes from the gunshots, and by that time I was just running.
Calls went into 911 minutes after the first shots.
Callers advising me only seeing one shooter.
We found the weapon. It is secured.
We have the shooter in custody, 110-7, multiple injured.
15-year-old Preston Cope would die of gunshot wounds after being transported to Vanderbilt Hospital. 15-year-old Bailey Holt died on the scene. 20 were injured, 16 from gunshots. Doctors say the survivors look like they will pull through. Police apprehended a 15-year-old they say is the gunman. He has already been charged with 2 counts of murder. 12 counts of first assault, akin to attempted murder, are being processed.
We will be filing paperwork to classify this defendant as what's called a youthful offender, and that is the process to charge him as an adult.
A day earlier, shots rang out in the cafeteria of a school in Italy, Texas. Before that, the campus at Cal State San Bernardino was locked down with reports of gunfire. This was the first deadly shooting of the year, but Benton was the 11th incident of gunfire at a school since January 1st.
We're almost jaded because there are so many. It's kind of a mixed bag. I mean, you're not all that surprised anymore.
Although police and prosecutors are withholding the alleged shooter's name, the students at the school here know who he is, and they're posting his picture all over social media. Also on social media, the same debate we have with every school shooting. The problem is easy access to guns versus the problem is not enough good guys with guns. Shannon, back to you.
Mike Tobin, thank you very much. Well, he never again deserves a minute of freedom. Those were the words of a Michigan judge who sentenced Larry Nassar, the former sports doctor who admitted to molesting some of the country's top gymnasts, with up to 175 years in prison. Nassar said the emotional testimony from more than 150 athletes and parents shook him to the core, but the judge questioned whether he was genuinely remorseful. We've also learned that Michigan State President Lou Anna Simon has resigned tonight amid accusations the university mishandled past complaints about Nassar's abuses while he was affiliated with the school. Well, is it racist to crack down on sanctuary cities? That's what a growing number of Democrat lawmakers are saying tonight. We'll debate it. President Trump today meeting with several of the nation's mayors to discuss infrastructure, but some, like New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio, turning down the president's invitation because of the Justice Department's new crackdown on sanctuary cities.
If this is about their efforts to divide and to play racial politics, then again, they were never serious about the meeting to begin with.
De Blasio joining with several other Democrat leaders boycotting the meeting because they say the Trump administration's crackdown on so-called sanctuary cities is a, quote, racist assault. Evan Bayh is a former Democratic senator from Indiana, and Mark Lauder is former press secretary for Vice President Mike Pence, both from Indiana. Great to have you both here with us tonight.
Great to be here.
Okay, so I want to go on with what you heard Mayor de Blasio say there. In this tweet, he also says, I'm not attending today's meeting at the White House after real Donald Trump's Department of Justice decided to renew their, these are his words again, racist attack on our immigrant communities. I want to ask you both, I mean, once you throw in that word, does it shut down any conversation about this underlying policy and whether it has any legitimacy or not, Mark?
Well, I believe having a seat at the table is the important part. And when you're running a city, when you're the executive and you're out to look for the best interest of your constituents, which in this case, the president was talking about infrastructure. He wanted to talk to these mayors about how to fix their roads, their bridges. And so to put the needs of a few 100,000 criminal, illegal aliens, in this case, what we're talking about on sanctuary cities, over the needs of the rest of your population, I think it's just irresponsible.
Senator, is it fair to use the words that this is a racist attack, or do you think that that ignites it so much that you can't have a conversation about what's really going on with sanctuary cities?
That kind of heated rhetoric, Shannon, doesn't help. You know, we need more dialogue in this country. We need more principled compromise, and if you're throwing those kind of highly charged terms around, it does make it more difficult. You know, I agree with Mark. We're a country of laws. We pass legislation. The courts enforce the legislation. If you don't like the law, you can't just kind of unilaterally say, well, we're not going to enforce it. You can't pick and choose which laws you're going to obey. Get involved. Change the law. That's what elections are all about. So I've never understood the concept of some cities just sort of opting out of enforcing the laws.
Well, and there have been a couple of court decisions that haven't been so good for the administration on this point. So we'll have to see whether this latest effort is also, we would expect, immediately taken up in court. We'll see. I also want to talk to you all about some of the newest developments going on with the House Intelligence Committee. They have talked about a memo that sparked this hashtag release the memo that they say shows abuses of government surveillance. And so now the Justice Department is saying, we don't want you to release this memo, at least not without going through us first. Here's what they say in a letter today to the chairman, Devin Nunes. It would be extraordinarily reckless for the committee to disclose such information publicly without giving the department and the FBI the opportunity to review the memorandum and to advise the HPSCI, the committee, of the risk of harm to national security and to ongoing investigations that could come from public release. Mark, where do they go from here?
Well, I think there's two things here. One, the Justice Department, but all federal government employees are very protective and cautious when it comes to classified information. And mostly it's not about the information, but the sources and the methods used to obtain it. So we always have to be very careful about that. But the other thing I would say, and putting on a communications hat in the White House where I used to be, if you don't protect those assets, there are so many others out there in the mainstream media and some of those who are trying to politicize this that will not cover the information. They will turn and twist the narrative to being about what kind of sources we've put in jeopardy or what kind of relationships we've put in jeopardy. And I think the message of the memo, if it's in fact true, I've not seen it, will get lost in the process by those who are trying to undermine what that memo is trying to say. So let's be careful and do it right.
Not surprising a partisan divide on the committee about this. Representative Trey Gowdy from the GOP saying, to say we want to see your memo when for months and months they haven't let us see lots of stuff we wanted to see. The memo came from what you gave us, FBI. There's nothing new in there other than what you gave us and what you showed us. Now, Adam Schiff, who is the ranking Democrat, says we need to produce our own memo that lays out the actual facts and show how the majority memo distorts the work of the FBI and the Department of Justice. He says if they go public with their memo, we're going to write one too, Senator.
It's another food fight in Washington, Shannon. You know, look, I was on the Intelligence Committee for 10 years. My father was on the Intelligence Committee back in the day when it was first formed. There was a long tradition of bipartisan cooperation on the intelligence arena to protect our country. And unfortunately, some of that's degenerated in the current polarized atmosphere. What they'd really need to do is to accept the FBI's request to come in and explain the sources and methods, why revealing that would compromise national security, and then make a considered judgment. But you can't just release that stuff without at least having some internal dialogue about how do you go about informing the public about possible abuses while still protecting important security and intelligence assets.
Yeah, it's a very fine line for them to walk. So we'll see how the two sides, if they can, work this out. Senator by Mark Lauder, great to have you both with us. Thanks for coming in. All right, President Trump taking off for Davos amid reports the global elitist billionaires may try a resistance-style approach with the president and walk out of his keynote speech. Former U.S. Ambassador to the UN, John Bolton, previews Davos and weighs in on a report you will not want to miss concerning former Secretary of State John Kerry and the Palestinians. And what good is a border wall? Who better to ask than the designer of one that's already in place?
I am very proud that I saved the life of so many people.
President Trump meeting today with several of the nation's mayors, even though some decided not to show up over a dispute over sanctuary cities. More on that later. And now, while we debate the merits of a border wall here, Israelis did the very same not so long ago. We met the designer of the so-called separation wall on our trip to the Holy Land earlier this week. Israel was in the midst of the second Palestinian Intifada from 2000 to 2002. Thousands of Israelis and Palestinians killed in clashes.
And people said to the government, enough is enough. We cannot live with such level of terror. Do something, build something.
They started with checkpoints across the country. Former Israeli Defense Force Colonel Danny Terza says there were obvious holes in that strategy.
But it didn't help because, you know, it was like a gate in the desert. We were checking only those who came to us. It was very easy to bypass by foot these checkpoints.
The uprising and terror attacks continued. So the Israeli government turned to Colonel Terza for a solution he'd been advocating, a separation wall. It would surround the West Bank, seal off the Gaza Strip, and line neighbors Egypt and Jordan and Palestinian communities in between. A mixture of walls, fences, and technology. The Palestinians hated it from the start, leading to clashes as it was built.
The best way to describe this is as an apartheid wall.
Some people from the world says that I'm building the apartheid wall. Well, it's not apartheid and it's not a wall, and I'm very proud that I saved the life of so many people.
And he thinks the ideas could work in the U.S. too.
The first thing that the United States have to do is to talk about the security concept, what they want to achieve. It's not only to construct a barrier, it's all the security concept.
Just as in Israel, Terza says any barriers in the U.S. will need to be crafted to work alongside the natural topography in order to be effective.
San Diego is a sandy area like Gaza Strip. So there are more tunnels in San Diego than in Gaza.
And despite his successes in lessening bloodshed in the region, Terza has taken criticism from the right, who says his wall ended up granting more land to the Palestinians, and from the left, who says he's divided society. Nevertheless,
I'm very proud of it.
Well, no doubt border security will come up in President Trump's State of the Union address next Tuesday. North Dakota Congressman Kevin Cramer announced today he plans to bring the owner of a construction company that built one of the prototypes for the wall as his guest to next week's address. According to the latest Fox News poll, 53% oppose building a wall along the U.S.-Mexico border, while now 40% say they do favor it. Well, tonight, a Hebrew language newspaper in Israel is reporting that former Secretary of State John Kerry met with a close confidant to Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in London. And at that meeting, Kerry allegedly advised him to tell Palestinian President Abbas to play hardball with President Donald Trump. Kerry reportedly saying, tell him that he should stay strong in spirit and play for time, that he should not break down and capitulate to President Trump's demands. Well, if accurate, how serious would it be to have a former cabinet official working against the current administration? Let's talk about it with former ambassador to the UN and Fox News contributor John Bolton. Great to see you.
Glad to be back.
All right, what do you make of these comments? Because apparently along with this, these are allegations in this newspaper about this conversation. They say former Secretary of State Kerry also said Trump's only going to be there for about a year or so. Just hold out.
Yeah, well, look, this is in the Jerusalem Post. It's a responsible newspaper. It's still just one report. But I would have to say it doesn't surprise me at all. The views attributed to Kerry are his views. Very, very different from President Trump's views, and the fact that he's saying them to Palestinians or Europeans or anybody else doesn't surprise me. I happen to think he's wrong as a matter of policy, but they are entirely consistent with what he did as Secretary of State. Now we come to the really interesting issue. What do we think of a former Secretary of State undercutting the current president? Doesn't this violate the Logan Act of the late 18th century? And my answer to that is no, it doesn't violate the Logan Act. In any event, the Logan Act is unconstitutional. If John Kerry wants to side with the Palestinians on an issue like this, well, God bless him, let him do it. This is something that happens all the time. Nobody should be surprised by it. I don't think the Palestinians are surprised by it, and I don't think it will have any effect.
Okay, a little bit more of what's being reported in the Post. They say this, Jerusalem Post. It was reported that Kerry said within a year there's a good chance that Trump would not be in the White House. According to the report, when referring to the president, Kerry used highly derogatory terms, and he surprised his interlocutor by saying he was seriously considering running for president in 2020. In addition to this, they also said that he offered to jumpstart his own peace talks in the midst of everything that's going on.
Well, in terms of John Kerry running in 2020, I'm in heaven. I just can't wait. Please, let's get started. And some of these other things he said, derogatory remarks about President Trump, that's, to me, a very credible report. That sounds exactly like what he'd say. And starting his own peace process, well, God bless him. Go for it. Knock yourself out, Secretary Kerry. Now, I'd like to hear Kerry's response to this. If he denies it all, that's going to be interesting. I don't think he will. I think it has the ring of truth.
And by the way, we did make several attempts to get in touch with him and get his response to this. We got nowhere with that. So we're happy to hear from him. And if he responds, we'll be happy to let our viewers know how he responds to this. Meanwhile, the president is getting ready to be in Davos. And one of his advisors, Barry Bennett, says this. Well, he served as an advisor on his campaign. Say, I think it's a victory lap on his economic policies. By the way, we have a new Fox News poll that shows a record high 17% of people say they now think that the economy is in excellent shape. Another 32% say good, the rest fair and poor, 35% and 14%. How much of that do you think the president will try to tout while he's overseas?
Well, I think it obviously is a chance for him to talk about what his actual policies are as opposed to the caricature that's often painted. And I think the tax cut is very important for stimulating the U.S. economy. I think he certainly should talk about that. But I think it's also a chance for him to clarify what his position is on trade and the rest of it. It's a risky proposition, but this is the gathering of the she high-minded from around the world. So I think he ought to go in and tell him why he's representing American interests, just like all of them represent their country's national interest, and go ahead and justify
Well,
it.
and quickly, what do you think about this whisper campaign that's building that they are planning to walk out a number of people when he speaks?
Make my day. Go ahead. If you want to demonstrate to the American people why we reject this Davos ethos, go right ahead, please.
We've made you happy. We have the Davos week walkout, and we have Kerry running in 2020.
It's a great evening.
The ambassador is very happy tonight. Great to see you.
Glad
Thanks
to
for
be
coming
here.
in. All right, Elon Musk wants to put a Tesla in space. We'll tell you about the latest SpaceX launch and look ahead to the big stories we'll all be watching tomorrow. Take a look at the newest and biggest SpaceX rocket, the Falcon Heavy, roaring to life today briefly for a launch pad test at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. SpaceX leader Elon Musk says the test was all good, paving the way for a likely launch next week. The Falcon Heavy is prepared to carry Musk's personal red Tesla Roadster into space. And a preview of tomorrow's news tonight. President Trump set to arrive in Davos, Switzerland for the annual Global Economic Forum. He's going to meet with UK Prime Minister Theresa May and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, among other world leaders. Plus, scientists are set to explain the 2018 time of the doomsday clock. You've seen this thing. And they're going to tell us why they believe we are moving ever closer to destruction. Starting to have new developments as well on the Mueller investigation and the fight over the, quote, release the memo fight they're having on Capitol Hill. So we'll keep you up to date on that as well. In the meantime, most watched, most trusted, and most grateful that you spent the evening with us. Good night from Washington. I'm Shannon Bream.